Tucker Carlson, an evil man. Evil, hateful man. I don't say this lightly. I don't say it with any illusions that I can do anything about it. Don't know what happened to him. Don't know why he's evil. But after watching this video, that is the only conclusion that I can come to. He's trying to foment a civil war. He just is. He's trying to create in his audience a hatred of Democrats and people of color. The only way to make sense, wait, that's not right. The only way to see what he's trying to do here, if you understand that he's not trying to make sense, or more importantly, he's trying not to make sense. He's just trying to trigger emotions, specifically hatred and anger. In these segments, he does what kind of looks like an argument. It kind of feels like he'll make an argument. He'll make assertions. He'll provide evidence to back those assertions. And it just doesn't happen. It kind of feels like each individual assertion will support a larger narrative, but they just don't. The evidence he provides is just made up. It's lies. The problems he pretends to address, that he pretends to care about, are equally made up. He can't actually care about them because they simply don't exist. He can only make him into problems by lying about reality itself. He knows he's just making it up as it goes along. The only question left is, why? Why does Tucker Carlson lie every night? What does he get out of making his audience hate their fellow Americans? The only possible answer is ratings. Hate, conflict, for some reason, attracts an audience. In this segment, for example, he's going to try to scare his audience by pretending to tell them about how the Justice Department has been taken over by Democrats. And as a result, Democrats are allowed to lie to Congress while Republicans are incarcerated for merely not cowering to the Democrats. That's all a lie, of course, but that's what he tries to pretend like he's doing. But what he's actually trying to do here is make his audience think that Democrats don't care that black men are hunting white kids for no reason other than they're white. And they don't care because it advances some Democratic agenda. You think I'm kidding? Watch the video. It's exactly what he's doing. The problem is that every last thing he says in order to scare his audience is a lie. Everything. He just needs his audience to believe it so he can continue to make millions of dollars every year. If he were better at his job, he'd be dangerous. And if more people were receptive to his lies, we'd have a civil war. Because what he's essentially telling his audience is that the system is rigged against them and that black men are hunting them just for being white. Yeah, I'm assuming his audience is white, sorry. But what choice do they have other than take up arms? This is why Tucker Carlson is dangerous and his lies need to be exposed. He's dividing America to get rich. If you're a Tucker Carlson fan, you should be outraged that he thinks so little of you, that he doesn't think he'll check that anything he just told you is a flat out lie. And he's making you afraid of a problem that just does not exist. The problem he describes here does not exist. Watch the video. Tell me I'm wrong. Here we go.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Peter Navarro is the picture of a law-abiding American citizen.
So we begin with an emotional appeal. Just look at him. Does he look like a criminal? I mean, look hard at him. Does he look like what you think of when you think of a criminal?
He's a 72-year-old retired business school professor. He's got a PhD in economics from Harvard University. His most recent job was extremely white-collar.
Well, if his last job was extremely white-collar, there's no possible way he could ever commit a crime.
He served as the White House trade advisor in the last presidential administration, famous for his tough stance on China.
Now, even Carlson's audience knows that nothing Carlson just said says anything whatsoever about whether someone is law-abiding. Carlson is just planting a feeling in his audience. Look, he's one of you.
He's never been charged with a crime.
You know who else has never been indicted of a crime? A little less convicted of a crime? Hillary Clinton. Yeah, but Carlson still knows somehow she's guilty of mass murder.
He's never trafficked fentanyl, for example, from Mexico.
Yeah, he's not like those people who traffic fentanyl from Mexico. You know, those people. People not like you. This is just more triggering. He's saying, think of Mexicans. Think of white kids ODing on fentanyl. Link Mexicans and death of white kids in your minds. That's what Carlson's doing for his audience. Feel the anger build. You know, he could have mentioned any other type of crime. Hell, he could have mentioned white-collar crime. But that just wouldn't evoke the same response. Because what Tucker's going for is response. He's going for emotion. And of course, it's all better with Tucker's audience if the crimes involve those people.
In fact, his hobby is yoga and riding his bicycle.
You know, I have to admit, I'm a little surprised Tucker Carlson went with this one. Because I'm thinking that yoga and bicycle riding are not very relatable to most of Tucker's audience. I'd be really curious how that went over with his audience. But, well.
In short, Peter Navarro does not seem like a criminal, much less a danger to this nation.
And that's where looks are deceiving. He's actually the exact kind of batshit crazy person who could bring down a country if given power.
And yet, last Friday, federal agents arrested Peter Navarro at Reagan National Airport in Washington. They did not call his lawyer, as is customary in cases like this.
It's interesting here how Carlson assumes that Peter Navarro has a lawyer. You know, before he worked for the Trump administration, he was a professor. Professors don't make a ton of money. Professors don't need lawyers. And working for the Trump administration, he was just a staff. You know, probably not make a whole lot of money. The man's probably not rich.
They didn't even come to his house, which, as it happens, is just feet from the FBI building. They could have walked, but they didn't. Instead, they took down Peter Navarro in public.
Note that they took him down. That particular phrase isn't an accident. What does it evoke to you? It evokes the image of FBI people coming in, guns at the shoulders, dropping from the rafters on their ropes, coming down. You know, other passengers scrambling all over the place, hitting the deck. Peter Navarro, don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot. That's the image Tucker's going for. He can't go for what really happened, where the FBI showed up at the airport, served him a warrant, asked him to come with them, took him down to the FBI station or the courthouse. I have no idea where they took him actually, and released him a half hour later. Nope. You have to have the drama.
As you would a fugitive terror mastermind.
See? I was right.
So everyone could see it and learn the lesson they were sending.
The fact is that nobody saw it. It sent a message to nobody. I'm sure if a video did exist of any kind of FBI overreach or abuse of power, Tucker would play it for his audience. I mean, what better evidence of FBI losing their minds, justice losing their minds? That would be scary as hell for Tucker's audience. That's how we know no such video exists and no such message was sent. Carlson just needs to construct a reality that simply doesn't exist. Because the actual one, where the FBI served Navarro with his papers, treated him respectfully, walked him out of the airport, not scary. But of course, all this is just another lie.
They handcuffed Peter Navarro, they put him in leg irons, and then they threw him in a cell.
It's important to note that Tucker is getting all of this from Peter Navarro himself. And taking Peter Navarro's word for anything is iffy at best. The man is straight up delusional. I'm not kidding. Now, it's possible that they handcuffed Navarro, but leg irons? Please. I mean, why would they put someone in leg irons who they're just going to release later that afternoon? It's not like he was on the chain gang. It's not like he's on the work farm. There's no need for leg irons. He's not running. FBI knows that. Everybody knows that. There were no leg irons.
He's now facing years in prison.
That's a lie. It's just the first part of Carlson's attempt to construct a narrative in which Republicans are being persecuted, even brutalized, for daring to contradict Democrats. And Democrats can get away with murder as long as it helps Democrats seize power. None of this, of course, is in any way true.
So what did Peter Navarro do to deserve treatment like this?
Tucker needs to build a narrative that will scare his audience. So he's not about to tell them the truth. He will, of course, make up a complete lie. But before we get to the lie, I'll let Ari Melber and Navarro tell you the truth. Oh yeah, by the way, quick note, there's a link in the notes of Melber's full interview. You should watch it. See how batshit crazy Navarro really is.
What was the plan itself and who was in on it?
Exactly. And I'm going to tell you that. The plan was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. The sweep was simply that. We were going to challenge the results of the election in the 6 battleground states. They were Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada. And basically, these were the places where we believed that if the votes were sent back to those battleground states and looked at again, that there would be enough concern amongst the legislatures that most or all of those states would decertify the election. That would throw the election to the House of Representatives. And all this required was peace and calm on Capitol Hill. And at 1 p.m., Senator Ted Cruz and Gosart, a representative, started the Green Bay sweep beautifully, challenging the results of Arizona.
So in order to scare his audience, to get them furious at Democrats, liberals, and people of color, Tucker needs to create his own reality, one that is untouched by ours. In the Tucker Carlson universe, the TCU, the Jan 6th riot was completely organic. Trump just held a rally at the Oval. When it was done, some people moseyed over to the Capitol, milled around for a bit. The police let them in. And then for no reason at all, some nice woman was shot and killed. And then everybody went home. That's the extent of what happened on Jan 6th in the TCU. And no, I'm not exaggerating. That is all Tucker Carlson will cover. That is all he'll say. And so Tucker's audience, as far as they know, that's the start and end of it. There was no planning and no plan. In the TCU, the stated purpose of the hearing, the one we're watching, is only to look at what happened between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. on January 6th. That's all they're investigating, according to the TCU. The entirety of the evidence that they have against Trump is the speech. In the TCU, if Trump didn't tell the crowd to go storm the Capitol in the speech, he did nothing wrong. None of the evidence that many of us saw on other networks or newspapers documenting all the attempts by Trump and his sycophants to overturn the will of the people, and certainly none of the evidence and testimony presented during the Jan 6th hearings exists. None of it. The Capitol Police never suffered any injuries, and no police died that wouldn't have died had it not been for January 6th. The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers never skipped the rally altogether and went and scoped out the Capitol building to find weak points. No poll workers ever received any death threats because they were doxxed by Giuliani and Trump. Bill Barr's Justice Department never looked into any of the election fraud claims, and more importantly, they never found no evidence for any of them. They never decided they were batshit crazy claims themselves. The entire Justice Department never threatened to resign en masse if Trump tried to appoint Jeffrey Clark as acting Attorney General for the sole purpose of sending out letters to secretaries of state claiming the Justice Department was worried about irregularities in voting. Of course, that's a complete lie too. There were no comms from Capitol and DC police warning about people with guns. Finally, nobody in the TCU knows that the only reason, I repeat, the only reason Jan 6th even happened was because of the stupid plan hatched by John Eastman and Peter Navarro to get Pence to ignore the will of the people and install himself and Trump back into power. In the TCU, had this plan succeeded, it would not have resulted in civil war, as Trump disregarded the votes of 81,268,924 Americans and declared himself president for life. Back in our universe, though, the Jan 6 committee, working on behalf of those 81,268,924 Americans, wants to hear about this plan to overthrow the election so they can figure out what they can do so that nothing like it ever happens again. That's a good thing. Nothing you're about to hear from Tucker will make any sense if you don't understand the TCU. The irony is that none of these facts really matter anyways. Carlson doesn't actually care about Navarro or any of the legal repercussions that he's facing. None of it is critical to the narrative. Navarro is just a face, somebody you could say is being persecuted by Democrats. But the details are wholly irrelevant because he's lying about them anyways. He could have achieved the same effect by just making up a name, pulling a photo from stock photos. He doesn't expect anybody in his audience to actually check a single thing he says anyways, because if they ever did, they'd stop being his audience because they'd realize he's been lying to them all along.
Well, he resisted a subpoena from the January 6th committee. The January 6th committee is Washington's latest partisan inquisition. It's run by Nancy Pelosi with help from obedient little quislings like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Navarro resisted that subpoena because he had nothing to do with January 6th. Nothing whatsoever. That's not disputed.
That is 100% wrong. He and John Eastman are the only reason January 6th happened. Again, the people in the TCU know nothing about the Green Bay sweep, and they never will. Still, the details are irrelevant. Carlson is just building a persecution narrative. That narrative was achieved by uttering the words partisan inquisition and obedient little quislings. That's the only purpose of talking about it.
Peter Navarro did not break into the Capitol. He didn't encourage anyone else to break into the Capitol. He wasn't even there that day. He had no idea it was going to happen. Again, that's beyond dispute.
In the TCU,
and Nancy Pelosi and Liz Cheney know that.
They also know, and Tucker knows, that's not what they want him to testify about under oath. But the truth would just get in the way of a good paranoid narrative.
If you really wanted to figure out what happened on January 6th, Peter Navarro would be the last person you would talk to.
Only in the TCU, where there was no plan. In our universe, he'd be the first.
Instead, you'd be talking to Ray Epps and various FBI informants.
For those not familiar with the TCU, Ray Epps is an agent provocateur. He is working with the FBI to make Trump look bad, apparently. He must have been working with others because there's no way patriotic Trump supporters would turn violent all on their own. They had to be spurred on, and they had to be spurred on by the feds. In the TCU, though, they ignore the fact that Christopher Wray, a Trump appointee, was director of the FBI and Bill Barr was the Attorney General. And of course, Trump was president. So somehow in the TCU, they have people working for the FBI that are working against their bosses. Okay, doesn't have to make sense.
But finding out what happened on January 6th and why is not the point of the exercise.
They actually already know why. They just want it on record, and they want the American people to know why. They want to show just how crazy Peter Navarro is and his plan to throw out the results of a free and fair election.
The point of the exercise is preventing Donald Trump from running for president again.
Yes, because Trump tried to overthrow the will of the people, essentially undermining American democracy just because his fifis were hurt.
So, in the service of that goal, Pelosi and Liz Cheney demanded that Peter Navarro surrender records of his private conversations with his former boss, President Donald Trump.
Yes, they want to know how involved Trump was personally in the attempted coup. But in the TCU, this is an obvious overreach of authority. Again, the lie is the key to building the narrative. Without the lie, you have no narrative.
And when he refused to do that, Congress voted to hold him in contempt in a partisan vote, and then Merrick Garland's Justice Department filed criminal charges against Peter Navarro. This is not the way civilized countries operate.
We agree. It's not how our country operates either. It's Tucker completely lying about how our country does, all to create a feeling in his audience that we are no longer the country we used to be. Oh, did I mention? He can only create that by lying.
Just because you control the White House and both houses of Congress does not mean you get to throw your political opponents behind bars.
Nobody disagrees, and nobody is behind bars. Navarro is just not behind bars. He's not. Carlson just needs his audience to believe they are, though.
That's not what we do in America. That's what they do in Haiti.
Correct. It's not what we do in America. And Tucker should stop lying that we are. It's hurting America. It's even hurting his audience.
But that's what we're doing now. And Peter Navarro is not the first.
He's not the any. They are just not doing what Tucker says they are doing. They're just not.
Biden's Justice Department also arrested former Trump advisor Steve Bannon for a similar fake crime. Steve Bannon is awaiting trial this summer.
Yep. They want to ask him what he meant by this.
You mentioned this plan. Here's Steve Bannon talking about it on January 6th.
So I keep saying the mantra, you call the play, now run the play, right? It's like the old Green Bay power sweep. It's very simple, just one thing leads to another, very logical, and the victories are firm.
But in the TCU, none of this exists. In the TCU, Democrats are just harassing people who have the audacity to support Trump, like Tucker Carlson's audience, for whom they'll be coming for next. Again, the entire narrative is completely made up out of lies.
So this is not something we've seen before. It's a huge step toward the politics of the third world.
It's not something we're seeing now. It's only happening in the TCU where none of the evidence that the rest of us knows about exists.
But the media, whose job you thought it was to push back against power, are not. They're in fact applauding because it turns out no punishment is too severe for those who disagree with the national news media.
Again, there's been no punishment at all. Zero punishment cannot be too severe. There's literally nothing for the national news media to push back on. But of course, in the TCU, Navarro's been rotting in solitary since they took him down at the airport. Maybe he even threw a sack over his head and got a few jabs in the kidney. He hasn't seen the light of day in weeks. But of course, even in the TCU, none of that was ever said either. It's just understood. In our universe, Navarro was released after booking and held a press conference detailing his ordeal that same afternoon, and he's free to live his life exactly as he was before he was arrested. It's difficult to imagine a less severe punishment.
Watch them gloat.
What happened to Peter Navarro is what should have happened to Peter Navarro. He was indicted. And when you're indicted, you're arrested.
What Peter Navarro did, it was so far out of bounds, it's so indefensible.
This prosecution is really about punishing Navarro based on his blatant disrespect for the congressional subpoena.
So they really are your enemies. They're not covering the news. They're plotting ways to hurt you. That's true.
I so wanted to cut in right after the clips to talk about the complete lack of gloating that Carlson promised. But that would cover up and avoid the true obscenity of what Tucker just did. Again, we have to remember that nothing in his show is an accident. It's put there for a very specific reason. Of the dozens of clips Carlson could have pulled of people talking about Navarro's arrest, he chose these. I didn't edit that transition at all. What you just heard is actually what Tucker immediately said after those clips. Let's watch them again.
What happened to Peter Navarro is what should have happened to Peter Navarro. He was indicted. And when you're indicted, you're arrested.
What Peter Navarro did, it was so far out of bounds, it's so indefensible.
This prosecution is really about punishing Navarro based on his blatant disrespect for the congressional subpoena.
And now listen to the exact language Carlson uses.
So they really are your enemies. They're not covering the news. They're plotting ways to hurt you. That's true.
So they really are your enemies. They are not covering the news. They are plotting ways to hurt you. They are your enemies. They are plotting ways to hurt you. Immediately after those three particular clips. Up to this point in the segment, Carlson was saying,
the point of the exercise is preventing Donald Trump from running for president again.
That was it. All he even tried to argue was that this was some kind of political retribution. Not even a hint of anybody coming for anybody in Tucker's audience. Not even a whiff of a hint. But after showing these three men, now.
So they really are your enemies. They're plotting ways to hurt you.
Is it possible nobody in editing noticed what just happened? None of the writers? Nobody? Of course not. It was the goal. Somebody on Tucker's staff, possibly Tucker himself, must have recognized that talking about the trials and tribulations of Peter Navarro, even the fictitious ones in the TCU, wouldn't really reach anybody in Tucker's audience. After all, he's just some academic, some Trump staffer that most of Tucker's audience couldn't really identify with after watching this segment. So they figured they'd just come out and manufacture a threat from three liberal commentators. So they put three liberals on the screen, and Tucker knew that's all he would need for his audience to accept his out of left field comment that they, the liberals, want to hurt you. It simply doesn't matter that nothing they actually said was in any way threatening. They looked threatening. And Carlson was just stating the obvious, even if he just pulled it out of his ass. If you need any more proof that they did this for any reason other than to scare their audience, just look at the harshness of the transition back. Right back to congressional subpoenas.
Congressional subpoenas are not optional, they lecture you. Comply with them or go to jail.
For the fifth time? Nobody's in jail. Carlson has to repeatedly lie about this because he's trying to create a narrative where Republicans are treated more harshly than Democrats. But if no Republicans are being treated harshly, he can't say they're being treated more harshly than Democrats.
That's the message the lawyers on television are sending.
I think Tucker means the liberals he just showed. And nope, they said nothing about anybody going to jail.
So let's pretend for a moment that that was true, though it's in fact not true.
Oh, quick note. Every time Tucker Carlson uses the phrase, in fact, what we're about to hear is not a fact.
If there was, in fact, a law like that, for that law to be legitimate, it would have to be, like all laws, applied equally across the board. And no less than the Attorney General himself has said that again and again and again. I came to work here, he said, because we're committed to the rule of law and to seeking equal justice under the law. That was Merrick Garland in January. Quote, we conduct every investigation guided by the same norms. Now, those are the norms under which this country has lived for 250 years.
Yeah. We also had this norm where sitting presidents, when they lost an election, they would assist with the transition to the next administration so everything can go smoothly. They certainly didn't have members of their staff plotting ways to throw out the votes of the people and overthrow the election. Since we're talking about norms and all.
It's not justice unless it's applied equally to all adult American citizens, period. Anything less than that is by definition not justice.
We agree. And that's why Trump and everybody who tried to ignore the will of the people should be tried.
But we're getting much less than that. And it's very obvious. Here's just one example.
What he means to say, here's my only example. And even with that, I have to go back 10 years and twist facts like pretzels, comparing apples to octopuses, in order to make them seem the same, because they are nothing like each other.
10 years ago this month, Congress voted overwhelmingly on a bipartisan vote, by the way, 17 Democrats, to hold Eric Holder, then the Attorney General, in criminal contempt of Congress. Holder had refused to turn over documents showing how the Obama administration had armed the Mexican drug cartels. Do you remember that? One of the firearms they sent to Mexico under the so-called Fast and Furious program was then used to murder a U.S. Border Patrol officer. It was a scandal at the time, in case you don't recall. Watch.
Yeah, we'll just fast forward through all the coverage of the agent being killed because it had nothing to do whatsoever with whether Holder should have been held in contempt for not revealing or not releasing documents he made in the course of duty.
So that was a legitimate scandal.
Though nowhere in the Constitution does it talk about Congress investigating scandals.
That implicated the entire U.S. government.
Nope.
People who actually have power, not the retirees sitting in jail because of what they did on January 6th.
That retirees sitting in jail thing? Yeah, that's a comment that did nothing to advance his argument. This wasn't its purpose. The only purpose it served was to point to people who Carlson's audience might find more relatable, who are actually in jail. Carlson, of course, doesn't want to talk about why they're in jail, because the narrative he needs to paint is that they're in jail for no good reason.
But people with actual power, and Eric Holder was at the very center of it, but Holder refused to comply with a subpoena from the Congress. Did the FBI arrest Eric Holder for that? Please. It was never even seriously considered. Holder asserted executive privilege, the right to have conversations with the executive, the president, that are private. He cited the long-standing policy of respecting executive privilege, and he got away with it. So a week ago, Peter Navarro made this exact point. He sued the Justice Department, pushing back against this subpoena 4 days before he was arrested. And in that suit, Navarro cited policy written by the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel. That policy reads this way, quote, since the 1970s, this office has consistently advised that the president and his immediate advisors are absolutely immune from testimonial compulsion by a congressional committee on matters related to their official duties, end quote.
On matters related to their official duties, end quote. Yes. Navarro was not working on official duties when he was trying to overturn a free and fair election. He was not even working as a member of the Trump administration. He was working as a member of the Trump campaign. Those two need to be separated. They are not the same thing. Trump was not acting as the executive during those conversations. He was acting as the campaigner, as the candidate. They are two different things. So whatever Navarro might have talked to Trump about with regard to overturning the election was not done in an official capacity. There can be no executive privilege because Trump wasn't acting as the executive at the time he was acting as the candidate. Tucker's entire narrative depends on the lie, yes, the lie that Congress wants Navarro to talk about official communications he had with Trump in the course of their duties. That's not what they want. They want to know the communications they had with regard to the Green Bay sweep, overturning a free and fair election.
In other words, if somebody asserts executive privilege, at the very least, Congress doesn't get to arrest them.
Congress doesn't get to arrest anybody, ever. The DOJ does. Even then, arrest doesn't mean what Carlson needs his audience to believe it means. Arrest does not mean jail. Only a court can sentence someone to prison, and then only after being found guilty by a jury of one's peers. Carlson simply says arrest over and over because he knows his audience won't make that distinction. The fact is, Navarro will probably never spend a day in jail for the contempt of Congress charge. If there's anything resembling justice, though, plotting the overthrow of a free and fair election, hopefully it'll be a different matter. We'll have to wait and see.
Before anyone is arrested, they have to go to a judge to rule on whether or not executive privilege is valid in this case. And that's exactly what happened in Eric Holder's case. And by the way, the federal judge rejected Eric Holder's executive privilege claim, and still he was not arrested. Why? You know why. Because he's a leading Democrat. But in Peter Navarro's case, Merrick Garland's DOJ did not even bother to ask a judge. They just arrested Peter Navarro at National Airport.
There's the arrested again, as if that's the gross injustice.
So what we're seeing here isn't really about Peter Navarro or Steve Bannon. What we're seeing is a massive escalation in the use by the Democratic Party of our justice system for partisan revenge.
The only massive escalation of anything is Tucker's rhetoric. So far, all he's pointed to is two people who have trial dates set for their charges of contempt of Congress. None of their freedoms have been taken from them, and somehow this is a massive escalation of the use by the Democratic Party of the justice system. But somehow, it's not about the two people whose treatment was evidence of that. It's not about Navarro and Bannon. Well, if it's not, what exactly is this massive escalation? No, yeah, that's the problem. It's not supposed to make sense. If it made sense, Carlson's audience might start thinking. By not making sense, Carlson can just say the words massive escalation and create the feeling in his audience that they are next. It's been his goal this entire time. That's also why Tucker doesn't bother to suggest what it would be revenge for. Yeah, that's on purpose. All he needs to do is say the word. That will evoke the response he's seeking.
That's exactly what that was. Peter Navarro wouldn't shut up, so they threw him in handcuffs.
Okay, now we've just drifted off into complete bizarro world. Even in the TCU, there's been no mention of anything that Navarro has said or has been saying. Nothing. This is the first we've heard of it in either universe, of Navarro not shutting up. In this universe, our universe, they indicted him because he wouldn't speak. Tucker's just spent the last 3 minutes defending his right not to speak. And then out of nowhere, they're arresting him because he wouldn't shut up. Again, Carlson's only goal is to scare his audience. He can't do that if they're only coming after people who are refusing to speak. Because in Tucker Carlson's audience's world, they're not refusing to speak. So Tucker Carlson just has to, with no prompting whatsoever, just flip it on its head. And so they're coming after him because he won't shut up. Because for many people in Carlson's audience, the feds coming after them for not shutting up is the only thing that would scare them.
And in fact, at the same moment Peter Navarro was thrown in jail for asserting executive privilege, a Clinton lawyer called Michael Sussman was acquitted by a jury seated by an Obama-appointed judge.
And now it's a massive conspiracy. The judges are in on it too. Carlson doesn't want his audience to remember, if they ever knew, that judges don't acquit. Juries do. So whoever appointed the judge doesn't matter.
3 of the jurors in that case gave money to Hillary Clinton's campaign, and not surprisingly, those same jurors declined to punish Michael Sussman for lying to the FBI to advance the Russia collusion myth that helped Hillary Clinton's campaign. Following all this?
Nope. Nobody can, because it's a reality that only exists as a Tucker Carlson fever dream. And like all fever dreams, it makes absolutely no sense. But at the same time, yep, you're trying to push a paranoid narrative that somehow the Democrats have taken over the world.
How'd those jurors get on the jury? How'd they stay there?
I have to admit, I'm really surprised Tucker went with this one. Because even in the TCU, this is a contradiction. Regular watchers of Tucker should be very familiar with this case. They should know that this case was investigated and prosecuted by John Durham, who was appointed to serve as special counsel by Bill Barr back in October of 2020. They were all saying that because he was independent of the FBI and Main Justice, he was finally going to bring Hillary Clinton and those naughty FBI guys to justice for illegally starting the Russia collusion hoax. They should know Durham is not controlled by the Democrats. This indictment was huge news in the TCU, the first of many, the beginning of the fall. They should know that Durham has so far produced one indictment, this one. They prosecuted the case, they lost. If the Durham team let a biased jury member or two out of the jury, they have nobody to blame but themselves. The irony is if they won, it was such a trivial crime that wouldn't have proven anything anyways. And yet they still lost. The fact that Tucker Carlson even tried this speaks volumes about how stupid he thinks his audience is. He's just going to assert that this was a miscarriage of justice and expect his audience to believe it, and forget everything he told them before.
Now, the FBI pretended to be outraged by the fact that Michael Sussman had lied to them, but then we learned actually the FBI was working with Michael Sussman and his law firm, Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie had an FBI workspace in its offices in Washington for a decade. And Michael Sussman was so close to the FBI, he had a key card to FBI headquarters. We know this from a recently released text exchange. We're quoting, "Do you have a badge or do you need help getting into the building?" The FBI's general counsel, James Baker, asked Sussman, and we're quoting now, "I have a badge," Sussman replied. Sussman had a badge to the FBI building? How do we get one of those? Oh, we're not leading Democratic lawyers, so we can't have them.
Of course, Carlson doesn't want his audience to ask what a leading Democratic lawyer is, if they actually are the thing. And that they are there leading Republican lawyers too? And do they also have FBI badges? He doesn't want his audience thinking that access to the FBI might not be political at all. And it might just have to do with people who often work with the FBI have access to the building. The irony, of course, is that Sussman's relationship with the FBI is completely irrelevant to the case because John Durham doesn't work for the FBI. John Durham prosecuted Sussman, not the FBI. Carlson knows all this, but he can't build his conspiracy using facts.
So Michael Sussman knew he'd never be punished. Take 3 steps back. What's going on here?
So far, it's just a special counsel failing to find enough evidence, even after 18 months of investigating, to convince 12 people that somebody committed a crime. It's not really that complicated.
In a fantastic piece today at The Federalist, Ben Weingarten explained how we should understand these 2 prosecutions. Quote, "They send an unmistakable message. We can get you anytime, anywhere, on any grounds we choose. You can't touch even a single one of ours."
Well, Maybe she get better prosecutors who can find better evidence that will convince a jury of one's peers. It's not the Democrats' fault that Republicans are incompetent.
That's it, right there. This is a partisan play by a political party that has somehow completely taken over our largest law enforcement agency.
If Carlson were trying to make an argument rather than just scare, this would be a great time to explain exactly how a political party has taken over our largest law enforcement agency. But all he offers is somehow. That's it. Somehow. He'll just leave it to his audience to fill in the blanks. We shouldn't ignore this little trick he just pulled, though. He offered a single case in which a jury actually held to the principle of innocent until proven guilty as evidence that the Democrats have taken over the largest law enforcement agency. When you think about it, that's beyond stupid. But Carlson expects his audience not to think about it.
And Michael Sussman is not even the biggest example of this. Andrew McCabe, Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, all of them lied to the feds as well. That's a crime. None of them were ever hauled off in leg iron.
No, McCabe was accused of lying to the FBI and DOJ regarding his improperly authorized releases of information to the Wall Street Journal about an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Yeah, he lied about whether he had sufficient authority to release factual information to a newspaper. That was it. That was his crime. In September of 2019, federal prosecutors recommended McCabe be indicted for actions relating to the leak. So, unlike what Tucker Carlson saying we let him off, they didn't let him off. They tried to indict him. But the grand jury did not return an indictment. They said there wasn't sufficient evidence, despite what Tucker Carlson thinks. And he was a Republican. So that kind of blows up Carlson's entire narrative about Democrats serving Democrats. Andrew McCabe was a registered Republican. Strzok and Page, their only transgression was sending personal text messages on FBI phones. They never lied to anybody. None of this makes any sense because it's not supposed to. It's just supposed to strike an emotional chord. Tucker's audience will have at least a vague recollection of hearing the name McCabe, Strzok, Page, and them all saying something less than flattering about Donald Trump, and still not ending up in Guantanamo, which of course is a heinous miscarriage of justice. All Carlson needs to do is mention their names to evoke the anger he's seeking.
In fact, they're now at CNN, MSNBC, and Georgetown, respectively. They were rewarded with better jobs for what they did. They always are.
Carlson knows that makes absolutely no sense. Of course, landing jobs at networks and universities says absolutely nothing about how Democrats are treated better by the Justice Department than Republicans. Again, Carlson is counting on his audience not to be thinking at all. They'll just hear CNN, MSNBC, and Georgetown and think elites. They always get special treatment, those elites. It doesn't matter that it's not the Justice Department that's doing the rewarding. They're all the same elites, rewarding each other for attacking and denigrating good, hardworking people. That's the image Tucker's going for, and that's the one he's building.
Jim Clapper and John Brennan committed perjury on television before Congress. There's no dispute about that. What do they do? Oh, they're on TV now too.
This is just proof that Carlson's not really making this argument. He's not even trying. Seriously. Clapper, Brennan, former director of national intelligence and former director of the CIA, are somehow advancing democratic politics, and that the Democrats are supporting them somehow for lying to them. It just really makes no sense. But all Tucker's really done here is kind of silently slide into a different narrative of the elites versus the common person. the common man. And that the elites get away with something that the common person would never get away with. And that's kind of where Tuckerson's trying to slowly nudge this idea without saying it.
Hunter Biden lied on a federal gun form. That's a felony. How was he punished? Oh, a mild probing on CBS that he just shrugged off as if it were nothing. Watch.
Yeah, I'll save everybody a bit of time and just skip that, because the only purpose is to remind Tucker's audience that Hunter Biden used drugs and had sex. I think it's worth mentioning, though, what Hunter lied about on that gun form. Apparently, he answered no in response to the question, "Are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance?" That's what he answered no to.
You committed a gun felony.
A gun felony? Seriously, Tucker? Yeah, he lied about being an unlawful user of drugs. I'm guessing more than half of the people who fill out that form lie on that one. Again, the actual facts don't matter. The only reason Tucker included this was so that he could scream, "Gun felony!" whatever that is, while Joe and Hunter Biden's faces were on the screen. That was sufficient to evoke the emotion that he desired.
It's all out there. But Hunter Biden is the president's son. And more importantly, he's a faithful party loyalist. So you know as well as he doesn't have a thing to worry about. In fact, he can flaunt his crimes. RadarOnline.com just got pictures.
Yeah, we'll just skip that because it has absolutely nothing to do with the argument he's pretending to make. And so after Tucker's addition for TMZ, we jump right back into La La Land. Don't forget to look at the date on the upper left of the video.
You know what bothers the Justice Department quite a bit? Defying the Democratic Party. Do that, and your house gets raided by a SWAT team that tips off CNN before it happens. Roger Stone discovered that the hard way.
Exclusive footage you're looking at right now from CNN as the FBI arrives at Roger Stone's residence in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, taking him into custody. They arrived before dawn there, before 6 a.m. or just after 6 a.m. A dozen officers were told.
FBI, open the door.
So that's the actual norm.
And that, of course, is just a lie. Roger Stone's arrest and conviction had nothing to do with defying the Democratic Party. On February 20th, 2020, a jury of Stone's peers found him guilty of 5 counts of lying to Congress, 1 count of witness tampering, and 1 count of obstruction of a proceeding. He was sentenced to 40 months in prison, but that was commuted by Trump. Stone lied to a congressional committee in 2017 when the Republicans controlled the House. Paul Ryan was the Speaker. The committee to which he lied was chaired by a Republican. The arrest in 2019 was made by the FBI, led by Christopher Wray, a Trump appointee. And Stone was prosecuted by the DOJ, which was headed by another Trump appointee, Bill Barr. And he was convicted in a court of law, which is not led by either party. The Democrats had absolutely nothing to do with any of it. Again, the paranoid narrative that Tucker is trying to build in order to scare his audience requires lies. Repeated lies.
If you were Tony Podesta and you work for the Democratic Party, you're totally fine. Nothing you do is going to get you in trouble, and you know it.
Tony Podesta? I have to admit that I'm not even sure what crimes Podesta is supposed to have committed. And here's the thing, most of his audience won't either. They'll at best link him with Hillary Clinton's campaign and therefore should have been punished for something. This, however, is just Tucker throwing out names to give the illusion that whatever he's talking about is widespread. After all, look at all the names he just said.
If you're Roger Stone, you've done nothing wrong at all, but you've given the finger to the Democratic Party, they show up at your house with guns. That's the norm the Attorney General is upholding.
Again, It's not an oversight that Tucker didn't even try to explain how Stone gave the finger to Democrats. That's the point. He doesn't have to. More importantly, he doesn't want to. Just keep, as he's doing here, throwing out baseless accusation after baseless accusation after baseless accusation. After a while, it creates an alternate universe where the facts just don't matter. The funny thing is that even with all of Tucker's lying to create the illusion of injustice where there is none, it's just a setup for what he's about to do now. Remember, all he's trying to do is scare his audience. Showing a few instances of some politicians being charged or not charged for lying or not lying to Congress or the feds, playing the game of politics isn't going to affect any of Carlson's audience. It's just something they do in Washington. Yeah, it may be fun to watch the spectacle, but it's not scary. Not something that's going to affect their lives. To really scare his audience, he needs to lie about what's happening on the streets of our cities, and even in our suburbs, where the real Americans live. And thus, we have this absolutely disgusting piece of theater.
At almost exactly the moment the DOJ was putting Peter Navarro in shackles,
again, no shackles,
the DOJ was also dropping the most serious charges against the two left-wing lawyers who tried to incinerate cops, burn them to death in their patrol cars during the BLM riots. Now, this pair had faced 30 years in jail on terrorism charges, but that was too tough for the Biden DOJ. Now they'll be out in a couple, max. Why? Because they've got the right politics.
If anything, and I mean anything, Tucker said there had even the remotest resemblance to the truth, it would be something with which we would all be concerned. But of course it doesn't. It's all a lie to scare his audience. According to ABC News, 2 attorneys pleaded guilty to throwing a lit Molotov cocktail into an unoccupied vehicle belonging to the New York Police Department. Unoccupied. They did not try
to incinerate cops, burn them to death in their patrol cars during the BLM riot.
Now, there is absolutely no way Tucker doesn't know that. He also knows that burning a hunk of metal, plastic, and rubber just isn't as emotionally compelling as attempted cop killers. Tucker knows the truth wouldn't evoke the rage he desires in his audience, so he chooses to lie. Without the initial lie, the lie about the failure to prosecute loses all its force. While it's true that the federal prosecutors backed off of their original sentence recommendations, Carlson completely lied about why. According to NBC New York, while other lawyers condemned their conduct, some objected to the severity of the charges, arguing that the case was improperly being handled as if it were an act of domestic terrorism. When the U.S. Attorney in Brooklyn asked that the lawyers be detained without bail, 56 former federal prosecutors sent a legal brief to the court criticizing the government's handling of the case. I'll repeat, 56 former federal prosecutors sent a legal brief to the court criticizing the government's handling of the case. The Democrats were not the ones who stepped in. 56 former federal prosecutors did. These 2 people burned a damn car. In no sane world is that domestic terrorism. Yes, the federal prosecutors backed off domestic terrorism charges because they should have. It was not because
that was too tough.
They are still going to lose their law licenses, and federal prosecutors agreed to recommend a prison sentence of 18 to 24 months. That is exactly how a sane justice system should work. But that's not scary. So Tucker needs to lie about every last fact of this case. He needs to make it about attempted murder, and a horrific one at that. And we can't continue to ignore the lie within the lie within the lie that Democrats not only supported all this, but orchestrated it because they supported the politics. Even if Tucker were able to tell the simple truth that these 2 lawyers torched a police car, it would still be a lie that a single Democrat supported it or the riots. Not a single Democrat anywhere, little less in Congress, excused riots, to say nothing of supporting them. They were universally condemned, but Carlson needs his audience to hate Democrats and will tell whatever lie he needs to achieve that. And I can't move on without mentioning the only thing Tucker was doing with this bit. He just needed to show two people of color on the screen and make up any lie about them that he wanted. Then lie about Democrats supporting whatever heinous thing Tucker just lied about them doing because they support their politics. Every last one of Tucker's audience knows what their politics are. And most importantly, it's not that these two support Democrats. It's that Democrats support these two. Tucker's only goal is to build an image, a feeling of people of color, lawlessness, brutality, Democrats. They are inextricably intertwined, one and the same. They are everything that is wrong with America. Tucker's only goal was to build an image, a feeling of people of color, lawlessness, brutality, Democrats. They are inextricably intertwined, one and the same. They are everything that is wrong with America, and Tucker's audience must protect itself. We have to remember that the only way Tucker could build any of this is by lying about all of it, every last bit.
And Liz Cheney's not giving you a lecture about people who try to burn police officers to death.
First rule of propaganda, repeat the lie.
Or a threat to our democracy. No, they're fine. We're just going to ignore them. It never happened.
Well, they aren't a threat to democracy, and they weren't being ignored. They are facing appropriate punishment for their crimes. There's nothing for Congress to investigate. It's not as if they tried to ignore the will of 81,268,924 Americans and install themselves as president. So yes, we have a division of labor in government. Separate branches even. DAs and when appropriate, federal prosecutors handle crimes. And Congress will look into attempted coups and try to write laws to prevent future coup attempts. That's exactly how it should work.
This happens all the time.
No, it doesn't happen ever. That's why Tucker Carlson has to lie about it, because he can't find a single example of it ever actually happening. Though it might sound like a throwaway line, a verbal grace note, it's the critical priming cue to what he's about to say. He's telling his audience that the absolutely disgusting lie he's about to tell happens all the time. And given that, his audience needs to be very, very afraid. It's why his audience needs an arsenal of weapons.
In California, at the height of the BLM riots, a career felon called Tony Walker executed a 19-year-old Berkeley student called Seth Smith, walked up for no reason, never seen him before in his life, and executed him, fired a gun into the back of his head. Why did he do this? Because of his skin color. It was a racially motivated attack. F that white MFer, Walker said. No one denies that. He said that. But here's the interesting thing. A guy's just executed on the street because he's got the wrong skin color? Sounds like a hate crime, right? No. Merrick Garland's DOJ did not pursue hate crime charges. In fact, a month ago, prosecutors caught an unbelievable deal with Walker. They sentenced him on a single charge of, brace yourself, voluntary manslaughter. F that white MFer, he said, as he executed a college student. That sounds like voluntary manslaughter.
I gotta admit, have to admit, I had difficulty. Continuing this analysis after that. My first thought was, well, anybody with children, put on headphones, turn it down, something. No, seriously, turn it down. It's now going to become inappropriate for children. Well, my first thought, simply this. Fuck off, you little punk-ass bitch. Fuck your mother, who brought you into this world. Fuck your father and your stepmother for raising you without a single bit of decency. And fuck everybody who pretends to love you. Fuck you, Carlson. Fuck you. Carlson is telling his audience, in no uncertain terms, that black men are hunting white kids and Democrats are okay with it because somehow it supports an agenda that the Democrats are pushing. He's trying to incite a race war for fucking ratings. He's lying about liberals being okay with murder for fucking ratings. To line his own fucking pockets. If he were better at his job, people would die, all for fucking ratings. It speaks volumes to the depravity of his audience. And if you're a Carlson fan, yes, I'm talking about you. That anybody could even consider the possibility that this might have the remotest kernel of truth to it. Seriously, have the decades of lies also destroyed any sense of decency that you might have had? Or is there something about you that needs to believe this about us? Here are the facts. According to SF List, Smith was shot in the back of the head at point blank range on the night of June 15th. He said goodbye to his roommate around 10 p.m. and headed out for one of his regular nighttime walks, carrying his cell phone but leaving his wallet behind. There were no witnesses to the shooting, which is believed to have happened just before 11 p.m., about 1 mile from Smith's apartment. Neighbors reported hearing a sound like a single gunshot, but no one reported it. His body was discovered by a man walking his dog about a half hour later. So this...
F that white MFer, he said, as he executed a college student.
...is a fucking lie that Carlson pulled out of his cellulite-filled ass. There is no possible way anybody could have heard him say that. Also, in berkeleyside.org, we have, "You got so many innocent people out here dying," Tony Walker told Seth Smith's family. "And here I am. I'm going out committing murder on innocent people. And it's just not right. I don't care who does it. It's no reason for it. I don't have any reason. I don't have no justification." Further, he says, "I was feeling alone and isolated due to COVID. I never intended to go out and hurt anyone. I wasn't raised like that. My mother didn't raise me like that." So this...
Why do you do this? Because of his skin color. It was a racially motivated attack. F that white MFer, Walker said. No one denies that. He said that.
...was also pulled out of his pasty butter ass, lying to incite racial hatred for fucking ratings. And...
the height of the BLM riot...
was added for no purpose other than to stoke the flames of racial animosity. It also means that...
Merrick Garland's DOJ did not pursue hate crime charges.
Because it wasn't a fucking hate crime, and this bit of feigned smugness...
A guy's just executed on the street because he's got the wrong skin color? Sounds like a hate crime, right? No.
...was all dependent on the lie he knows he pulled out of his pasty butter ass. And according to egcitizen.com, an Alameda Superior Court judge on May 23rd sentenced Walker to 25 years in prison for killing Seth Smith. The 60-year-old defendant last month made a plea agreement with the Alameda County prosecutors, which had him plead no contest to voluntary manslaughter in exchange for avoiding a jury trial. So,
in fact, a month ago, prosecutors caught an unbelievable deal with Walker.
Is just more bullshit to give the impression that Walker skated, all to scare his audience, all for ratings. There was no unbelievable deal, just the standard bookkeeping that courts do every day. Walker will be in jail until he's 87 years old. He'll probably die in jail, as he should. But Tucker, being the little bitch ass that he is, can't tell his audience that because his disgusting lie about Democrats not caring that black men are hunting white kids would collapse. It might cost him some viewers. The simple fact that a young man was senselessly murdered and a mother is going through pain that most of us, fortunately, can't even begin to imagine. The fact that the murderer will probably die in jail will do nothing to relieve her pain and give her a sense of closure, but we never expected the justice system to do that. In this case, it functioned exactly as it should, without bias or favor. For Tucker Carlson to take this tragedy and try to use it to foment a civil war for ratings, for cash, is beyond disgusting. If there's such thing as evil, this would be it. Tucker's sole purpose for even presenting this incident is to plant the association in his audience's mind of black men, murderers, enablers, and Democrats. Nothing that Tucker Carlson presented here is even remotely true. He's just yelling, boo! Black man, boo! Democrat, boo! Be afraid. The argument he pretends to make for this entire segment is just a facade for his stoking of civil unrest, possibly even civil war, for ratings.
This is a dangerous trend, and not just because people are dying. Nothing destroys the legitimacy of our institutions more than politicized law enforcement.
Really? Nothing? How about flat out lying to 3 million people a night about how they're actually doing their job? The simple fact is that not only is this not a dangerous trend, it's not a trend at all. Tucker Carlson lied about every last part of it to manufacture a problem where there literally is none. None of what Tucker Carlson just spent 10 minutes saying is happening. He's creating problems out of whole cloth to scare his audience.
You can't have that. Justice must be blind. If there is a single institution we have to preserve for the sake of our children and grandchildren, it's our justice system and the law enforcement agencies that serve it. They can't be corrupt. If they're corrupt, it's going to be pretty hard to live here.
So let's revisit that. Let's look at the image that Tucker has on the screen for the 15 seconds where he talks about the need for justice to be blind. Dangerous trends, preserving institutions for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. And it's going to be pretty hard to live here.
This is a dangerous trend, and not just because people are dying. Nothing destroys the legitimacy of our institutions more than politicized law enforcement. You can't have that. Justice must be blind. If there is a single institution we have to preserve for the sake of our children and grandchildren, it's our justice system and the law enforcement agencies that serve it. They can't be corrupt. If they're corrupt, it's going to be pretty hard to live here.
Yeah, that wasn't an accident. It wasn't someone asleep at the control board who missed his cue. Tucker wants his audience to know there's a reason for all their problems.
Liz Cheney and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the lunatics on the January 6th committee.
All right, I gotta come clean with y'all. My heart's no longer in this video. I mean, Tucker's done what he tried to do. He should have ended the video right now, but he's got to pretend like he's going to tie it back into what he was saying before, because he's got to pretend that he actually was doing something other than stoking racial animosity. So we'll pretend that he's pulling it back. So yes, Tucker, if reality were anything like you need your audience to believe it is, they would be lunatics.
Have done far more damage to this democracy.
If that were even close to true, Carlson would not have had to lie about everything he just said for the last 13 minutes.
Than the rioters ever did.
And now he's back to the lie that the Jan 6 committee is investigating the rioters, or that anybody said the rioters were the primary threat to democracy. No, that would be Trump, Navarro, and Eastman. And by the way, it's not an accident that Tucker didn't mention Eastman, despite the fact that the committee subpoenaed his emails and a judge ordered him to release them. There's just no way he can spin Eastman to fit his narrative. Eastman had one role and one role only: coming up with a plan to overthrow the will of the people and install Trump as president.
Far more. And now they're trying to make it worse. Axios is reporting that some members of the committee, quote, want big changes on voting rights and even to abolish the Electoral College.
And Tucker just expects his audience to know how abolishing the Electoral College will make it worse. The irony here is that if Tucker were in the business of making the world a better place, and not just lying about everybody who's not his particular definition of conservative, he could honestly discuss the pros and cons of the Electoral College. Because that is really something a lot of us want to abolish.
Abolishing the Electoral College. And if you're against that, of course, you're undermining democracy.
Well, yeah. The Electoral College was put there specifically to restrict democracy. It's literally what the people who wanted it said they wanted it for. They were afraid of democracy.
Was it a conspiracy?
I think certainly, I mean, look, if you look at the court filings,
Do you believe it was a conspiracy?
I do. It is extremely broad. It's extremely well organized. It's really chilling.
And of course, there's zero chance that Tucker will explain to his audience that she was talking about the plot to throw out votes of certain states and install Trump as president. Let's see.
Oh, it's really chilling. What's really chilling,
I guess not,
is when the committee gets to arrest people not because they violated meaningful laws or pose a threat to the United States.
Yes, that would indeed be chilling. It just doesn't happen to be true.
But because their politics are unacceptable. Because they have given the finger to people like Liz Cheney.
And this is where Tucker just expects his audience to have completely shut off their brains. People like Liz Cheney? You mean lifelong conservative Republicans who are loyal to the Constitution over a single person? No, he just expects his audience to know that since she has gone against Trump, she has gone to the dark side. So the lie still works.
Is Liz Cheney okay with that?
There's nothing to be okay. None of what Tucker said is even remotely true.
The upholder of democracy. We texted Liz Cheney on Friday and said, are you okay with this? They just arrested a 72-year-old man who did nothing wrong?
Okay, that's a flat-out lie. There is no way Carlson sent an email to Cheney's office saying Navarro did nothing wrong. Carlson knows exactly why the committee wants to talk to him.
Doesn't that cross some kind of line? Are you going to stand up and say something about it? She didn't respond.
Liars gotta lie.
The January 6th committee has just hired a former producer of Good Morning America called James Goldston. He'll be overseeing the committee's primetime hearings on Thursday night. So the show trial now has a production crew. And of course, we'll be covering that in great detail on Thursday. By arresting Peter Navarro, they're hoping to shut up one of the most vocal critics before it begins.
Wow. Last stop, Bizarro Central. Everybody off. They arrested him because he wouldn't talk, not because he wouldn't shut up. He held a press conference on the steps of the FBI building after they finished arraigning him that very afternoon. He hasn't shut up since. But I have to give Carlson credit for trying to bring this back around so he could pretend this really was about Navarro and January 6th. It's unlikely, though, that anybody in his audience was really watching after the scary black man on the screen. Well, that's all the Tucker for this time. Like and subscribe.